This is a tutorial for getting started programming with IBM Amos software, particularly version 25. They've now added support with integrations to Visual Studio, which makes programming much simpler. So the source of documentation, all the information you can find about programming Amos is going to be found in this window. So if you go under the help menu, contents, it's going to come up with this window that has all the class references. Amos graphics class refers to all the elements that you can manipulate here in the path window. The engine class reference has specific measurements like the chi-square, the degrees of freedom that you can access straight in the model. But what I like to do is, instead of using this help window, because a lot of times I have to close Amos when I'm programming, is to go to the web version on amosdevelopment.com/webhelp/index.html, and here you can find all the same information, and you can have it open at the same time that you're programming. So here is getting started with Visual Studio. The first thing you have to do is install Visual Studio Community 2015. You can find a free version at visualstudio.com/vs/downloads. Download Visual Studio, get it installed. Then the first step is to double click the install location. There's a file called amos.vsix, and that will set up all the integrations with Visual Studio. After you've done that and you start Visual Studio, and we start a new project, under Visual Basic you'll find an option for an Amos 25 plugin, and you can name that where you want, select your location. You can create a Git repository, and that will get you started. You'll just see a blank project with a bunch of sub-procedures. You only need the top 3. I'll show you an example of one of my plugins, the Invariants plugin. When you first get started, you'll just see a function for the name and the description, which controls what your plugin is called in Amos, and the main sub procedure. So this is where the main sub happens, and all your logic will go into that function, and you can create separate functions that can be utilized within that main sub. So this is the block of code that first gets executed when you run your plugin. So some things that you can do, with the get checkbox, pd.get checkbox method, you can control various analysis properties here. So we were able to check that we were getting standardized estimates with that method. You can one of the big things that you can do with programming Amos, which is very useful, is you can access the output file through XML, which a lot of your estimates that you can't obtain anywhere else, like your regression weights table, your standardized regression rates, these you can't access unless you use a certain library. And so I want to teach you how to use that. You're going to need to import system.xml, and I've built some helper functions that you can copy that basically, if you go in the output window, you can find the path for an object. So if you do show path, it'll give you this string here that can be used to access, let's say I wanted to get this information, or a certain table. You do the same way. You can show the path. So this helper function, you just pass in that path, and it's going to return the XML element, which is useful for accessing all that information. These two helper functions One you need to use if it's a string you're accessing here, and one if it's a number type variable that you're accessing. And it takes a row and a column, and it will return the attributes inside that, the inner text inside of that. So these are really helpful for getting information. You can see my application of it here. I use the getXML method. I pass in the path, and then I'm able to access right here. I want the third column and the X element row from that table, and I'm able to use it and iterate over it. So really a foundational concept for programming in Amos, using the X path. And then another key integration is outputting to an HTML document. So you can copy this code that I use from some of my other projects that starts a text writer trace listener. I found that sometimes I need to do a .clear, trace.listener.clear before this. Most of the time I don't have to, but then you can debug.print, and you can see I'm just writing an HTML document as strings, and that all comes together. So with the invariance plugin, it's going to check the group A and group B and see if there's a significant difference. So after you've written all your code, you're going to go build your solution, rebuild your solution if you're building it for the second time. And that's going to show up in, I have a shortcut to it, but in your user, app data, local, Amos development, Amos 25 plugins folder. And if you're using somebody else's plugin, you can also stick it in this folder. It'll show up in Amos. But you can see after I built it, it showed up, Amos invariance. It's really nice with the new integration. All you have to do is build your plugin, and there it is. And then you'll see it here under the plugins menu, invariance, the name that I gave it right there. And when I run it, it's going to go through all the logic that I wrote in my program. And this plugin actually takes a while because it's testing every single path. You'll see it's running there. And yeah, we'll see the output file here pretty soon. But while that's running through, I'll show you. This is where github.com/johnlim. You can find all my repositories for Amos, various plugins that I've written, and you can clone them and build the solution, and it should work for you. You can fork the repository, make changes to it, and make suggestions to improve the experience. But yeah, you'll find that you can't build your solution while Amos is open. So a lot of times you have to exit out of Amos and then reopen it. There we go. We've got our output. It's done a global test and the local test and the interpretations. So a lot of times this is how you'll want to show your results from running your plugin. So if you have any questions, feel free to send me an email, comment on my repositories. Good luck programming with Amos.